Hey everyone, this is Nikachu. Wizards of the Coast has slammed the banhammer down again. But this time it was in Legacy, and not in Modern or Standard. They actually made changes to formats that... They made changes to the formats no one was expecting. People were definitely expecting something in Standard, maybe something in Modern, but definitely didn't think anything in Legacy or in Vintage was going to get touched. Well, I'm not too close to the Vintage community, so maybe they saw it coming. We're going to go through all the formats, but let's start with Legacy. Sensei's Divining Top, been around so long that I thought it could not ever get banned, is now banned. The linchpin of Miracles, a deck that has been excruciating to play against for a lot of different archetypes, probably incredibly oppressive because Counterbalance was like a Chalice of the Void on everything because they could constantly spin the top and counter whatever on earth you wanted to play. And we all know how oppressive Chalice of the Void can be. Chalice of the Void is incredibly powerful. Counterbalance just a million more times powerful when combined with Sensei's Divining Top. So a lot of people are probably pretty happy about this. But I am not. Let's talk about probably why it got banned, or not probably why. The card is incredible. Practically speaking, in paper, the card is just stupid because it takes forever for people to look at the top three cards, make some decisions. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do it that way. And even if you're a really fast, proficient pilot, you still went to time, and games still went incredibly long. And if you weren't a proficient pilot with Miracles, if you didn't know what you were looking for, if you didn't know what you were doing, then these games took infinitely too long to play out. They were, practically speaking, fine online. I never went up against a Miracles player that was going to time or timed out because of Sensei's Divining Top. The whole thing was very easy to do online. There's no shuffling online, so that got cut out of the equation. Miracles definitely shuffles quite a bit because you spin the top, and if there's nothing on top that you want, you use a fetch land, shuffle everything away. So there's a decent chunk of shuffle effects, including Ponder, in the deck. So for practical reasons, the card is finally banned. It was banned in Modern for that exact reason. People are taking too much time spinning the damn top, and so you've ruined it for everybody. If everyone could just do it really quickly and efficiently, we'd have this card in Modern, and we could probably keep it in Legacy. So that was the bulk of why it should have been banned probably a long time ago. Because aside from that, is Miracles a really powerful deck? The answer is yes, but it wasn't too super oppressive. The fact of the matter is not a lot of people actually played Miracles. I mean, it's funny. It's obviously the deck that's always on top in gigantic Legacy tournaments. Joe Lissette showed over and over and over again that he is a Miracles master. He's consistently winning a ton. He won a ton of Legacy tournaments. His win percentage in Legacy must have made him look like he was cheating. And despite all that, I can only think of one pro that gravitated to Miracles, and that was Reed Duke. Reed Duke said, "You know what? I think Joe is actually winning a lot with this deck. I'm gonna play Miracles too." But aside from him, everyone else decided to play whatever they wanted to play. They played the Delver decks. They played Sneak and Show. They played Elves. They played Storm. Despite the fact that Joe is winning at an insane clip, did not sway anyone's mind to move to Miracles. So Miracles ended up being a pretty actually small portion of the Legacy metagame. It just so happened that whoever was playing with it was winning a lot with it. So it always ended up being on the top tables. I feel like it was probably significantly overrepresented. But yeah, that's Miracles. So it does have a lot of power. It probably does deserve to be banned, despite the fact that it wasn't played too much. Yeah, goodbye. How do I feel about this? I think this is terrible. So for the Merfolk community, this was awful for us. This was catastrophic. That was a good matchup, and not only that. Okay, so let's just talk about why it was a good matchup. Terminus doesn't even kill us all that much, because if they want to, all they do is 1-for-1 True Name Nemesis. So long as you don't overcommit to the board, you shouldn't have a big problem. And there are situations where you can commit to the board if they put like a mentor or a bunch of angels on the battlefield. Okay, now you can commit a bunch of creatures to the board because if they terminus, it won't be like a 3-for-1. It will be at least a 2-for-4 or 2-for-3. We had a lot of good cards to interact with them. So, like, who cares about your counterbalance lock when we have Aether Vial and Cavernous Souls available to us? Who cares about your Terminus when we can just put one true name Nemesis on the battlefield and force you to deal with it? If you play Terminus on that, who cares? It was just a 1-for-1. Or at worst, you'll 2-for-1 us, but we still have cards like Silvergill Adept to help us grind back into the game. And we could even have a Mutavault on the battlefield to also help us in the game. Chalice of the Void, amazing card against Miracles. Shuts down a ton of their 1-drops. Merfolk had a lot of game against Miracles. I would say that up to this point in history, the Miracles deck evolved to a point where they were fighting back quite a bit. They had more Snapcaster Mages, more Council's Judgments, more wear and tear like effects. Just a lot more interaction in general to beat Chalice of the Void and to beat Merfolk. But even with that, if we count up all the games, Merfolk was ahead. That was a good matchup, and if you ever wanted to win a big tournament, you always want to have a good matchup against the decks that you'll see in day 2, the decks that you'll see in the top 8, and Miracles was definitely one of those decks. So that is a very unfortunate loss for Legacy Merfolk. But I'll tell you what the kicker is beyond that. Elves is going to be so much more powerful. Elves is going to be the new big deck in Legacy, and that's bad news because Merfolk has not a damn chance against that deck. Well, I mean, maybe we can dedicate 15 sideboard cards just for that one matchup, but it is atrocious. No, so now people who don't know, Elves is really, really powerful. It is an incredibly strong deck that has not had the respect or spotlight that it deserves, mostly because of Miracles. Elves can basically destroy anything, and if you want to look at itsjulian.com, Julian is a person who is an Elves master, and he wins at an 80% win rate with Elves in Legacy, and respectfully so because, well, I mean, Elves has like a bunch of tutors in the form of first off, the deck is quite redundant. It can spew out a ton of creatures out all at once. It is resistant because of Elvish Visionary and Glimpse of Nature. It's got Gaia's Cradle, which is Tolarian Academy for creatures. It's insane. They got a bunch of tutors in the form of Green Sun's Zenith and Natural Order, so they can combo off that way. But they don't even need it. They could just spew out a bunch of creatures, and you just don't have enough mana to deal with all of them. So Elves, such a powerful deck. Why don't we see more Elves in the Legacy metagame? Miracles. Miracles kept Elves out of the spotlight. Elves could never get a really high finish in big tournaments because Miracles was the deck they have to beat. Like, Merfolk can just put a true name Nemesis on the battlefield and force Miracles to deal with it with a Terminus, but Elves can't exactly put a Llanowar Elf on the battlefield, keep turning it sideways, and expect a victory out of it. No, they gotta go wide, they have to commit a lot of resources to the board, and boom, Terminus, and you lost all your stuff. Without Miracles keeping that deck in check, we were going to see a ton of Elves. Elves, I think, is going to be the new super powerful deck in Legacy. I mean, there are some decks. There's decks that can race it, of course. You know, like I believe some versions of Storm, some turn 2, turn 3 combo decks can beat Elves, but Elves has a lot of game against Delver decks. Don't think that Delver has like an immediately better, great matchup against Elves because Elves has quite a bit of game. I used to play Bug Delver in Legacy, and boy, Elves they just play more things than you can deal with, and they turn off Daze. Daze is one of the most common counter spells in Legacy, and they just turn it off because they just have so much mana available to them. And they have Thoughtseize effects. They can play black. They can splash black and play Thoughtseize effects. And don't think that like Grafdigger's Cage and Chalice of the Void are going to do it because they play with Reclamation Sage. They've got the answers to those things, so no problem with that. So yeah, I'm scared that Elves is going to be a big deck because Merfolk has no chance against it. It's really bad. It's the worst matchup, I think, for Merfolk. Um, so we're just gonna have to see what's gonna happen. I don't think Elves is gonna make a huge move in the beginning because Legacy is sort of a slow format for things to get popular. But come Grand Prix Las Vegas, probably an Elves deck is going to make it really deep because the Elves players are no longer going to run into Miracles decks. And before I leave Legacy, I might be jumping the gun that Miracles is dead. I mean, it sort of looks like it, but maybe there will be some replacement out there. Maybe there are enough cantrips to keep maybe a sort of pseudo soft lock in place. Like Miracles maybe could still be an aggressive deck with a bunch of mentors in the deck, and it doesn't necessarily need a long game lock. Maybe it can play with enough cantrips to slow the game down to a point where they get the mentor in play more cantrips, put a bunch of tokens in play, and try to win that way. So maybe the deck can, continue to live on in some form because it was really powerful, and maybe it will be taken down a notch. But likely the deck has been pretty nerfed because Sensei's Divine Top is really powerful. So let's move on. I guess, to Vintage. Vintage has finally felt the sting of Gitaxian Probe. Gitaxian Probe being an obscene card that is now only really super legal in Legacy. But they don't ban things in Vintage, so it's been restricted, and Gush has been restricted. I'm not certain, but I think Gush was unrestricted like 3 years ago. So now Gush historically has just been incredibly busted. The card is obscene in Pauper, and is just obscene whatever format it's playable in. The funny thing about Vintage is the banned and restricted changes for that format are actually quite frequent. That format is like heavily scrutinized, or like I don't know why the changes happen so frequently. It happens more often than any other format, in my opinion. I feel like changes are happening in that format more often than I would expect. But I guess there are some people at Wizards of the Coast that absolutely love this format, and they're taking it upon themselves to make the changes as they happen. So apparently Mentor was a little bit too popular. I know this deck was the moment that Mentor was spoiled, it was a Vintage deck, and I guess people are just getting tired of it. So let's move on. I'm going to move on to Modern. A lot of people are expecting maybe something in Modern should get banned. I get the feel there are no bans in Modern. I get the feel from Wizards of the Coast that they only want to ban or unban something when Modern is going to get is settled down, is stale. And we definitely don't have that in Modern right now because Death Shadow has just shaken everything up. There are now like multiple versions of Death Shadow decks. There's anti-Death Shadow decks coming in to beat it. Like Living End is back because it has, I assume, a reasonably good Death Shadow matchup. Dredge is back in response to. It's funny. Dredge was huge. Then something got banned and then it fell off the earth. Oh, Death Shadow's back, and now Dredge can come back. So Dredge uses the graveyard, doesn't care about Death Shadow. And same thing with Living End. So the Inquisitions and Thoughtseize have a very minimal effect on Living End. They can just laugh at the damn thing. So Death Shadow has shaken up that format. So no need to really ban or unban things. And if there was something I want to be banned, it would probably be something either Street Wraith or Mishra's Bauble. I'm really fighting for Mishra's Bauble. I really hate free spells. I don't look at Street Wraith like a free spell. I mean, it draws you a card, but at the detriment of 2 life. And it's going to be just all gravy for Death Shadow because they can utilize that loss of 2 life. But still, I think it's like a pretty fair card. Mishra's Bauble, on the other hand, it does all sorts of things that I don't want it to do. Like, it puts an extra card type in the graveyard for Tarmogoyf for Traverse the Underworld. It's a free spell, so it can help trigger Prowess and other things like this. Free spells are busted. They're always busted. So I was hoping to see some sort of free spell come off get like axed, but I can understand that we don't have enough time in Modern. We got to like wait for the format to settle down to see what's going to happen because it just got shooken up like big time with Death Shadow. I definitely do not want to see Death Shadow get banned. I think Death Shadow is great for Modern, and Death Shadow for Modern is something like what Delver of Secrets has been for Legacy for many years. Delver created so many different flavors of Delver decks. We had Jeskai Delver with Stoneforge Mystic. We had Rug Delver with Wasteland Stifle, Nimble Mongoose, and Tarmogoyf. We had Bug Delver. We had Grixis Delver. We had Four Color Delver. There are so many different flavors and variety, and they all had their own personality. They had their own different way of approaching the Delver, constructing a Delver deck, and it was very unique. And I felt like it was a wonderful thing to have in Legacy. It was very nice because you're not always playing against like one archetype. You're playing against like there would be many different variations of that archetype, and you have to approach them differently. Like even the Grixis Delver matchup right now in Legacy there are different types of Grixis Delver. There's some that are playing Snapcaster Mage and Baleful Strix. There's some versions playing Young Pyromancer. So I think that sort of flavor to Legacy is fantastic. It adds a lot of personality to the format, and it does the same thing to Modern. We're seeing Jund Death Shadow, Abzan Death Shadow, Grixis Death Shadow. I think this is great, and I think we're also seeing sometimes Esper Death Shadow. I think that's a great thing for Modern, and I don't mind that there are many different Death Shadow decks, and we see that the format can fight them off. We're seeing the return of Dredge, we're seeing the return of Living End. So I think I like it. I like it. If we want to axe something from Death Shadow, it should be Mishra's Bauble, or it should be, I guess it could be Street Wraith, or it could be both, but not Death Shadow itself. I think that this card is good for Modern, and I think it's good in a healthy way. It's made the environment very new, very creative, and I think overall it's very positive. So lastly, moving to Standard. Now I don't play Standard right now, but I've played Standard many times. Now everyone is tired of the two deck format. Well, I have a wake-up call for like a lot of you. Standard has always been like a two-deck format. Like most of the time, there's just these two big decks, and then there's just a bunch of other crap at the bottom, and that's it. That's it. Like I understand, like over the last maybe 2 years, there were quite a variety of decks with the Collected Company was legal in Standard. But let's be realistic. That hasn't been like the history of Standard. There's usually just two big decks, and maybe they're sort of annoying because of the copycat decks. I can see for a lot of people it's not fun to just lose to a two-card combo. And Standard is in a spot right now where, I mean, if you want to play a combo or control deck, well, you've got the copycat deck. If you want to play an aggro deck, you play Mardu Vehicles. So there's basically something for everyone. So instead of hoping for bans or anything like that, why don't we just like delve deeper into these matchups? It's funny, you can't make everyone happy. If you rotate the format too often, you make people angry. Oh, I can't afford to play Standard. But if you keep the format lasting a lot longer, then you make everyone upset because the format gets stale, or they're really tired of playing the same deck over and over and over again. So I don't know. My favorite format was like Theros Ravnica. Seriously, and I played this Mono Blue Devotion deck in what was like a 3-deck format. 2-deck at one point because people didn't think that Mono Blue Devotion was a thing like halfway through the format. And I didn't complain. I won a ton during that era. So if you're not a fan of 2-deck formats, play Modern, play Legacy. I mean, Standard's vulnerable to these situations. They happen all the time. It's going to happen again in the future, and you could say, well, they could just ban something. Well, we don't know if they have to ban something. We'll see how some cards roll out from the Pro Tour, and see if they have to take any action from it. Yeah, we just have to wait and see. Don't worry about Standard. I'm going to save Standard. I'm not going to play Standard right now, but after the Pro Tour, I'm going to have to start playtesting it. More news on that in the future. I'm not afraid of these decks. Bring on all the Mardu Vehicles. Bring on all the Saheeli Rise. Bring on all the Felidar Guardians. I'm ready for you. So, are you happy or sad about these ban restricting announcements? I'm sad. I'm sad for Legacy Merfolk, but hopefully we can keep trucking on. I'm sure we will, but it's just a little upsetting that this is right before Grand Prix Las Vegas, um, and for the most part, like all my experience in Legacy Merfolk was pretty solid up until this point. Hopefully, maybe it still will be, but something random could just happen at this GP that I'm not expecting. This has been Nikachu talking about the banning and restricted announcement.